Affairs Minister Anita Anand, meanwhile, addressed the United Nations this morning, laying out the Carney government's foreign policy priorities in light of a changing world. She spoke with us shortly after delivering her speech. Hi, Minister. Pleasure to welcome you back to the program. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks, Vashi.
Politico wrote this morning that after being in the room for Donald Trump's speech to the UN last night, that you recast the speech that you delivered this morning, which happened just minutes after Donald Trump announced yet another big round of tariffs. This time, 100%, he says, on movies made outside of the United States. Do you know how that will impact Canada?
Well, first, I just want to correct the record. I have been writing this speech for a number of weeks, and it is a speech that I drafted on my own. So I'm not sure the source of that particular point in this morning's article that you referred to. In terms of our approach on any particular tariff measure that the United States is adopting, we are, of course, working for the benefit of the Canadian economy. One of the points in the speech that I made at the UN General Assembly today is, in fact, about our economic resilience at home. Canada is doubling down on our multilateral relationships, not only in defense and security, but also in areas of the economy, such as the WTO. We are forging new economic partnerships with partners. I cited the trade agreement with Indonesia last week, Mexico, and further efforts in the EU, for example. So this is all hands on deck for Canada in terms of defense and security, in terms of economic resilience, as well as, of course, standing up for our core values.
Let me drill down on that, because that's sort of a focus of the speech that you delivered, right? Here are the three planks of our foreign policy as we put it forth. Defense and security, as you mentioned, the second, economic resilience, and the third, core values. I want to pick up on the economic resilience part, because you gave some examples in Mexico, Indonesia, and in Europe. Your opposition at this moment in time says that you're essentially conveying something that isn't true. That in Indonesia's case, for example, that deal was actually arrived at in November of 2024, before this prime minister took office. That in Mexico, there's not anything really tangible besides an agreement saying that you want to work together more. That even in Europe, CETA is largely in place, and that there's no sort of proof of what those expanded relationships will actually mean for Canadians. Can you respond to that criticism that basically you're advertising something that isn't fully actually provable?
Actually, they're grasping at straws. Canada is the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. We have strong trade relationships. What we are doing is enhancing already existing strong trade relationships by making sure that we're leveraging our international relationships. So with Mexico, for example, the work that we are doing is to expand the scope of the relationship, to ensure that we are putting on the table Canada's competitive advantages in the area of critical minerals and energy, for example. And so work, of course, has been ongoing, but in this moment of time, what you are seeing from Prime Minister Mark Carney and our broader team is that we are doubling down on the efforts to expand our trade relationships. And that is what you will continue to see. The EU partnership is a great example. Now, as a result of that agreement, Canadian companies have the ability to compete on the same terms for EU contracts that EU businesses have. That is a difference, Vashi. Trade relationships, economic relationships among countries are complex. Canada is on a good footing, and we are enhancing our trade agreements, our economic relationships right across the board.
What, with respect, though, Minister, will those enhancements tangibly mean for Canadians? I understand the strategy imperative behind it. I think strategic imperative, I think most Canadians do, right? We have become so reliant on the United States that we have to look to become less reliant. But how soon will those efforts bear fruit for Canadians who are looking at a second quarter contraction of the economy to the tune of 1.6%? The closest country in the G7 that even, comes anywhere near that is Germany at a contraction of 0.3%. Like, we are faring worse than other countries right now.
Actually, Vashi, what you need to do in building a strong foundation and diversified trade relationships is continue to pursue those relationships, not retreat. Canada, as I said in my speech this morning, is a multilateral trading partner with many other countries. We are going to ensure that those trade agreements benefit Canadian businesses and Canadian workers. This is a time where it is not only Canada that is seeking to further diversify our trade relationships, but every country I'm speaking to here at the United Nations has similar goals, which is this is an area where we see greater protectionism and unilateralism in the global economy. Canada, for our part, will continue to work within multilateral organizations on defense and security. That's NATO and NORAD, for example. In terms of the economy, that's the WTO and individual multilateral trade agreements like CETA and like the CPTPP. These are fundamentally important to the Canadian economy as well as the global economy. And Canada will work to further enhance our leadership on the world stage as other countries retreat towards greater protectionism.
Is your government, though, being honest with Canadians about the degree to which that notion and those values and those endeavors that you just explained will actually supplant our economic relationship with the United States? To give your previous government credit, you signed a number of significant free trade deals with different regions of the world that came into effect during that 10-year period, and we still remained trading partners with the United States to the tune of 3/4 of all of our exports consistently through that decade heading to one single location. So when you talk about enhancing the relationships, like, the Prime Minister often says, like, we can give ourselves what others don't, implying that we'll be able to supplant what we lose with the United States. But the facts just don't bear that out, like, at all. So why not just be honest with Canadians about it?
Actually, I do not agree with your frame. This is being honest with Canadians in the sense that we have a trading relationship with the United States where 75 to 80% of current trade is covered under that agreement. When we talk about the sectors that are not covered, our government will, A, support those sectors as we have with steel and aluminum, for example, as we have with the auto sector, for example, and we will also work to diversify our trading relationships so that there is even greater opportunity for Canadian firms and Canadian workers to benefit from multilateral trade relationships. And I want to stress that changing the composition of a trading relationship does not occur overnight. We have work to do to ensure that we're leveraging the free trade agreements that we have signed. Again, the only G7 country that has such extensive trade agreements across the board. And we'll work to ensure that Canadian businesses are cognizant of those trade relationships that already exist. But you're going to see us continue to sign additional new agreements with other partners. The EU example is just one. Indonesia is another. And of course, I'm traveling to India, Singapore, and China in a few weeks, and I'll continue to ensure that the Canadian domestic economy is on the table for greater enhancements of our domestic economy.
Do you think your government will be able to change the balance? Like when you said it's not something that can take place overnight, do you think that is ultimately possible? And what should we as Canadians, I guess, interpret from the fact that your government is not anywhere close to matching the tariffs that are in place from the United States, that you've made a cognizant decision not to hit back in a commensurate fashion, and as the opposition would accuse, be elbows down now?
Well, Vashi, you're kind of overlooking the point that I made just a second ago, which is that 75% to 80% of our trade is already still occurring under the North American Free Trade Agreement. The second point I want to say, and that in answer to your question, is yes, I do. I do believe that we will continue to be able to enhance our trade relationships with new partners, and we will be able over time to further diversify the Canadian economy. Let me give you an example of my conversation with the Foreign Minister of Pakistan. I raised the key point about canola exports that we want to ensure markets for around the world. Pakistan happens to be the third largest importer of canola in the world. We agreed as foreign ministers to continue to have this conversation at every level so as to ensure that there are other markets for Canadian farmers in the area of canola. This is just one example. Does this occur overnight? No. Does it take time? Yes. Are we ensuring that we're diversifying our economy for the benefit of Canadian businesses and farmers and workers? Absolutely. This is the time where Canadians need to see their government stepping up to diversify our trading relationships and our supply chains. And that's exactly what we're doing. That's what I spoke to at the United Nations this morning. And that is the work that all of us across the government and the Prime Minister are engaged with every day.
I'm glad, Minister, you brought up the example of canola, because we spoke with Michael Kovrig the other day, who reminded me back in 2018 when China leveraged a whole suite of tariffs on canola. The lesson to the government at the time was supposed to be to diversify markets, and instead, as a country, we just drilled down on the Chinese market, which I think informs another challenge to your government, which is that is an example of when the lesson was not heeded. And you're telling Canadians they should just trust you on face value now, and that this government, just because there's a different prime minister, will heed that lesson and be able to diversify. I'm not overlooking the fact that you put forward. I'm offering a challenge based on the history of the Liberals over the last 10 years, who have not been able to capitalize on those agreements and fully diversify markets.
Well, I appreciate that you're skeptical, Vashi, but when we're in these positions of leadership, we have to lead. And the key point is that in times of economic stress, we need to ensure that we're doing everything we can to benefit the Canadian economy and the Canadian workforce. And that's exactly why our diplomacy will be tied to the benefits that it can provide here at home in Canada. That is why in every conversation that I have, I am pursuing not only the defense and security of our country, but also the economic benefit that we can provide through greater diplomatic relations with a particular country to the Canadian workforce and the Canadian economy. Again, Vashi, you seem to want to have a solution overnight. What I am saying is that this takes time, but we are not letting our foot off the gas in terms of ensuring that at every turn we are advancing Canada's economic interests and Canada's leadership in multilateral fora, so that we are not only benefiting the Canadian economy, but we're contributing to the growth of the global economy as well.
With respect, I certainly don't think that something can happen overnight. I think there are 80,000 people in Canada who have lost their job over the last 6 months who are hopeful that this isn't sustained. And I think that, your government in the election promised to make us the most powerful economy, the strongest economy in the G7. You're the ones who set that expectation, not people who are asking questions of you.
Exactly. And the election was on April 28th, and we are here now in mid-September, and we will continue, or late September, and we will continue to ensure that there are markers of the success. For example, the agreement with Indonesia last week, the strategic agreement with the EU that was signed in June, the agreement with Mexico that we signed a couple of weeks ago. There is work happening on the ground, Vashi, and that work will continue to show benefits for the Canadian economy. This is the work we are doing to diversify trading relationships and supply chains, and we will continue to see greater advantages to Canada. At the same time, we will continue to work with the United States in terms of the trading relationship with them. This is an all-hands-on-deck moment, and I know Minister LeBlanc is working daily on that particular relationship as we seek to diversify with other trading partners and in other supply chain contexts.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Minister, appreciate your time as always. Thank you. Safe travels.